כמה סיבובים!
Hey guys, so hopefully my audio is a lot better now than it was last time. I boosted the sound gain, and I'm hoping that the roboting isn't going to return, but we'll have to see. How's everyone doing? It's over. It never actually began. So, just double checking to make sure that everything else is working. All right. Well, seeing as there hasn't been that much new information on the Iran war, there's not really much to talk about there, other than more of the same. And proof that what I was describing, their strategy, actually is turning out to be correct. Because they are, you're starting to see the Israeli morale break. And you're starting to see the population demand an end to the war. And this is really the only way that Iran is going to win this thing. And I think they are going to succeed in it. How's my day going? My day's actually been pretty good so far. I got more sleep than I had expected, because I was having some sleeping issues, but things are a lot better now. So, and it looks like the sound quality is working well. So, oh, hang on a second. Is there an issue with the browser window here? Let me see if... a little bit. There we go. That's good enough. Anyways.
כמה סיבובים?
You got this guy freaking
אנחנו
out.
נלחמים על הבית! אנחנו עושים כל מה שאנחנו יכולים פה!
Well, it's Hebrew, so there's no real point in keeping the audio on, but you can see he's freaking out about his town getting bombed to shit. As what happened, I believe it was yesterday. And remember, there were people
מה אתם עושים? מה אתם עושים, ריבונו של עולם? מה אתם עושים? או שתגידו שאתם לא מסוגלים לטפל באירוע הזה ותשחררו אותנו, או שתעשו מה שצריך כבר, ריבונו של עולם.
Are we good? Hopefully, let me know if there's any static. I swear to God that it's not that my microphone is not working, because when I'm using it on Discord, just talking with people on Discord, I don't have any issues. It's only when I am when I'm doing the stream, it seems to have an issue with OBS. I'm not sure. That's good. Knock on wood. Hopefully it stays that way. Anyways, what I was saying is that you're starting to see the morale break in Israel. And this is exactly what I was expecting would happen. And this is the strategy that they're going with. Oh, that's excellent. No static. That's perfect. Okay, let's hope it stays that way. Who knows? We'll see. But what's more important, I think, because there's nothing new to really report other than, like, this guy's freaking out. It was pretty funny, but this is a more important thing. And I'll read it off real quick here. It says, the IDF Chief of Staff has warned that the IDF is on the verge of collapse after 900 straight days of war. This is what he told the government yesterday. Reservists are being stretched to the breaking point across multiple active fronts simultaneously: Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, West Bank, and the Iranian front. And the no ultra-Orthodox conscription law has been passed, leaving thousands exempt from service in practice. This is actually a huge issue in Israel because they have conscription. The ultra-Orthodox are able to get exemptions because they keep Netanyahu in power in Israel because they're members of the Likud coalition. It kind of operates the same way European parliaments operate, where political parties form coalitions to have majority governments. It's the same in Israel. Like Likud is the mostly supported by Mizrahi Jews, which are like Middle Eastern Jews. They're not the Ashkenazi. And there's two other parties that support Netanyahu's Likud coalition. And that is the Shas party, which is an ultra-Orthodox Sephardic Jewish party. And then there's the United Torah Judaism party, which is the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi party. So there's these two small ultra-Orthodox parties, and they're pushing the Likud coalition over the edge into a majority government. And this is how they've been able to maintain things for the past 20 years. And this is creating huge tension because the Israelis are expected to put their kids in the front line to get blown up, whereas these ultra-Orthodox just hide in their yeshivas and drain public coffers. In a certain way, it's kind of based in their own way because they're not dying for the government. But to be honest, Israel is one of the governments where if I was an Israeli Jew, I would I would be more willing to fight for Israel as a Jew than I would be willing to fight for Canada as a Canadian. I'll put it that way. Anyways, that's going to be their long-term strategy, and it is going to work. I don't think that they're going to last another month, and Iran is more than prepared for another month of this. I think they're going to attempt an invasion, and this will be, like, you're seeing a lot of people that are speculating, if an invasion happens, maybe it will be repulsed, or like the U.S. will take the territory maybe with a lot of casualties. And I'm saying, like, no, it's going to be a disaster for the Americans. The only fighting force they have that is capable of fighting right now are the Marines. Everyone else is there's going to be like immediate mutinies as soon as they're faced with a meat grinder. Like, this is not the Korean War. This is not even Vietnam. And Vietnam was bad, but there was still a lot of patriotism to drain in the Vietnam War. It's nowhere near what it used to be. So if they do end up attempting a landing, it is going to be like I'm not sure if I've said this on stream, but I've said it when I've had conversations on Discord, where it's going to be like the Russo-Japanese War for the Americans. And it's the Russo-Japanese War was the rising Japanese Empire defeated the Russian Empire. It was the first time in hundreds of years that a non-European power had militarily defeated a European power. And that's different from the European power invading another country, getting bogged down, and then leaving, like what happened in Afghanistan or in Vietnam. It's an actual military defeat after a war of aggression. And prior to that, like, the concept of white supremacy wasn't a slur. I think I did talk about this last stream. Might as well recover it. The concept of white supremacy was not like an accusation like it is now. White supremacy was a statement of reality in the way that the political landscape was in the 19th century and early 20th century, where you just had these European powers dominating the globe. That the defeat of Russia by Japan shattered that, and it really altered the psychology and thinking of the population at the time. And you're going to see the same thing happen with this war. But that's not really the topic of this stream, though I will get back into it. One of the things I wanted to talk about, though, is the energy issue, because you're seeing a lot of people talk about how, like, especially Americans, they will talk about how, we produce our own oil and gas, so we can just use our own supply and not have to worry about the rising costs of the Strait of Hormuz closure. And this is something that they don't seem to understand, because the way the U.S. economy functions, like, it's sort of like a central bank with this country welded onto it or latched onto it. But the way that it functions is the rest of the world, when they do international trade, like when Vietnam trades with Australia, and say the Australians are buying rice from Vietnam, okay, they do not give Vietnam Australian dollars, and then the Vietnamese give them bags of rice. What they do is they convert the Australian dollars to U.S. dollars, and then they give those dollars to Vietnam, and then Vietnam converts those into Vietnamese dong, which is their currency. So the U.S., that's how the U.S. operates as a medium of exchange. The reason why they can do that is because the U.S. economy is designed to be open and easy to access for the rest of the world. So you have if you're a country and you're holding U.S. dollars, you know that at some point you're going to interact economically with the United States. So there's a good reason to hold that money. But with what they're doing here with energy withholding, which they will eventually do, I'm 100% certain that they will stop exports of energy. This is going to cause a crisis with this, because this is like a stress test proving whether the U.S. can be trusted as the world reserve currency. And when they shut down oil exports and gas exports, that is going to trigger. It's going to leave like all of the U.S. allies in the loop, trying to figure out how to resolve their energy crisis, while the U.S. is just abandoning them. And this could force them to make alternative arrangements. Like Iran has already talked about how they're allowing passage through the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for Chinese yuan-denominated trade. Well, there's going to be a lot of countries that might just do that if the alternative is, energy crisis, blackouts. So this is what I suspect is going to happen. And then on top of that, there's a lot of people that will say, well, they're only blocking like 20% of the oil and gas transit and production. So it should only cause a 20% increase. But you have to remember, all of these countries, they have domestic populations that they have to satisfy. And so it's going to be, the incentives are all going to be on the oil and gas producing countries that are not like massively overproducing. Like, for example, Canada will never block exports because we have so much oil and gas that it makes a lot of sense for us just to keep exporting it. But there's a lot of countries that don't have that, and they use a large portion of what they produce, and it will heavily incentivize them to shut down exports. The U.S. obviously being a good example, in order to keep domestic prices as low as possible. That will actually cause the oil and gas prices to increase a lot more than you otherwise would expect them to. Because again, that's where all the incentives are going to go. And it's interesting because Ukraine is starting to hit Russian oil and gas depots with the expectation, I think, that Russia is going to take advantage of this and use it as leverage against Europe. And Ukraine is trying to prevent that from happening in the first place. We'll see where that goes. But even if it's only like a 20% increase in energy prices, AI is already on the verge of popping the AI bubble. Once we get to that point, we could see a collapse that's on par with the 2000s .com bubble, which most of you don't remember, and I don't remember either, but I was reading into it, and it's very similar. Like, you had this explosion in websites and other services that were almost like pointless in terms of what they did. Like, you had like some of these were like interactive phone book websites, and they were getting millions of dollars dumped in. You're seeing something similar with AI products, where there's a lot of them that don't really, like, they're kind of fun to play with, like the Suno video creator, but practically speaking, they're not that useful for the amount of money that it costs. And you're going to see a massive collapse in all of these unproductive uses of AI, and that's going to hit the tech sector really bad, like worse than what we've already seen. We will still have useful AI out of it, but that's almost a bad thing, because it's going to be like again, if it's like a 30% increase in productivity per person due to the AI, that's, unless you have a 30% increase in demand for the services, that means that there's 30% fewer people that you need to output the same amount of work. And that's going to put downward pressure on the availability of jobs and of wages, especially on the lower end. It's going to be ugly. Hang on a second. Am I still live, guys, by the way? Okay. Yeah, we're good. I'm just making sure. Thought I saw something that looked a little concerning on my end, but it looks like I'm still going. Anyways, that's the energy side of it and the job side of it that a lot of people don't realize. And for Zoomers and younger millennials, especially on the lower end of the career ladder, well, I mean, I don't even know if it can get that much worse, to be honest with you. Because, like, even though there's still entry-level jobs for, like, tech, for example, they're very dedicated to importing people from India, for example, as opposed to domestic workers. And it's almost like, the way I've looked at it, it's not just India, it's also like Eastern Europe, for example, where, you know, the wages might be half of what they are in America. And the way that I see them often doing it with tech companies is they will outsource to Eastern Europe, and they will, for the entry-level stuff, and then they will insource experienced people after years of experience into America as, like, skilled H-1Bs. So they almost cut out the entire entry-level economy for Americans. And it's this weird relationship America has as an American economy has with the nation, the country, where it's almost like the nation is sort of treated with contempt, where they kind of see Americans, like I'm talking about the business class, they see Americans as this group that they have to tolerate, but and maybe throw them a few bones every now and again, but they almost see them as like an inconvenience. Because it's like, wouldn't it be better if we didn't have this country attached to us and we could just run as the world's central bank and like finance hub, and then just import whoever we want to do the work for us, and then we don't have to worry about these Americans that are demanding higher wages and that are having families. And it's like, because if you realize how inconvenient it is or how uneconomical raising a family is, like the amount of expense and years of education that goes into raising a family, from a business perspective, it makes no sense to have children. Like you should just promote a childless, sterile lifestyle for people, and then just continually import people from productive, reproductive societies. And once they reach adulthood, you just import them, and they're already grown, and they might even be educated. You know, it's a market failure from that point of view. You know, this is why there's not a direct relationship between like the national interest and the economic interest. So the economic class, the nation is almost an externality. Externality is the word I'm looking for. That's how a lot of these companies see, like a lot of the business class sees the countries that they're attached to. You know? And it's really bad. Job market's non-existent, been unemployed for 4 years now. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's really bad. Ironically, the one upside to the oil crisis and elevated prices, like even if the war were to end tomorrow, oil prices are going to be elevated for at least a year due to the stopped production. That's going to make getting work in the oil sector in Alberta in Canada a little bit easier. But other than that, like I'm almost dreading saying that there could be some opportunities there, because I'm like, how are they going to fuck this up? Are they going to do something to fuck it up? You can't really, it's hard to say. Yeah. Yeah, Croatia is actually getting a huge ton of migrants that are coming in. Like I know Central and Eastern Europeans, they're getting a lot of Indians and Nepalese, etc., that are working these sort of DoorDash jobs. And it's weird. It's like there's this, the way I had envisioned it, it's almost like the first world and the third world are going to, like their goal, the vision that these people have, like the business class, is that they want to homogenize the whole world, but then they'll have like a class system where the former first world and the former third world, it's almost like the first world will be where like the entire globe's upper and middle class will reside, and then the third world is where the underclass will reside. But they'll be like composed of the same people. Basically, it's not going to be like French in France or Germans in Germany or Japanese in Japan. They're going to be Indians there, Indians there, Indians there. But it's like the wealthier Indians are going to be the citizens in these countries, and they're going to be importing slave Indians to do the menial work. Like that's, and also like not just Indians, but like every other ethnic group that is willing to buy into this scheme. It's like this perfectly efficient market. That's the way that I've seen it. And I'm actually an enemy of market efficiency. Market efficiency means that there are fewer opportunities to profit in the middle between the transaction. And that's where most of us are able to eke out a reasonable quality of life. This is why you would have like Luddites that would attack the mechanized agricultural machinery to destroy it, because they were cut out of the middle of the deal, because mechanized agriculture massively increased the efficiency of labor, and it made a whole ton of these farm workers obsolete, and they were literally starving to death. Well, what are you going to do at that point? You know? Yeah, I know. Guava, this is my experience as well. I don't hear anybody criticizing anybody for not being able to find work, except unless they're like over 60, I would say. And thoughts on Romanian gasoline costing $8 a gallon. Yeah, you guys are going to get hit hard in Europe. I don't even think that, because Orban, for example, in Hungary, and I believe the Slovak prime minister, they've tried to maintain decent relations with Russia for practical reasons, because they don't want to end up in a situation like what's happening now, where the oil and gas is going to be cut off. But the problem is Ukraine knows this, and the Ukrainians are not stupid. Like, they're just going to blow up the pipelines that transport this gas, and they're going to attack the oil tankers, the Russian oil tankers that are transmitting this oil and gas. And the Western EU countries, the wealthier EU countries, are also going to impede access to Russian energy because they are trying to win the war due to the sunk cost fallacy. And hello from Albania. Currently smoking in a Hawks. Oh yeah, what's his name? Wasn't he? He was the guy. He was the communist leader, right? And then there was, like, before him, there was a general in the Albanian army that called himself King Zog, or something crazy like that. And then he got overthrown by Hoxha, and Hoxha made all those bunkers all over the place, right? He was kind of like the Gaddafi of Europe, where he was sort of this weird, outlandish guy who would do crazy things and was kind of independent. I know a little bit about him. I think I watched Bald and Bankrupt wandering around the Albanian bunkers. It's pretty interesting. And yeah, Guava, I live in Canada as well. Yeah. This is why I'm able to stream at 2 p.m. on a weekday, because if I was in America, I would be doing something probably more materially productive. So, and yeah, there was a telephone in the background. No, it's the place I live in has a landline downstairs, so that was what went off there. Hey, how you doing, Minded Trouble? Yeah, well, it depends. I don't think, like, you're seeing a lot of attempts to manipulate the market. I don't think that it is going to dump, like oil and gas is going to dump. If you look at the way that things are going now, even if the war ended tomorrow, there's been so much disruption in the oil and gas market that it's going to take at least a year to bring prices down to pre-war levels. So it's going to be elevated for quite a while. And furthermore, we haven't seen the escalation endgame yet, because here's the crazy thing. Israel actually gets their oil and gas supply guaranteed by America. So they have no reason to not blow up the whatever they can. If they feel like they're going to lose the war and it's going to be a strategic loss, they are going to do everything they can to destroy as much as possible. If they sense that the U.S. bases are going to be destroyed in the Middle East, and they're going to be driven out of the Middle East, they will destroy as much oil and gas infrastructure across the entire Persian Gulf region as they possibly can, including so-called allies. So, now that's not investment advice, and I'm not going to give any investment advice, but I do think oil and gas prices are going to be very unpleasant for the foreseeable future. I can't give financial advice. I could just point at the fundamentals right now. There's no reason to assume that oil prices are not going to decrease, or not going to increase, rather. Like, it's what you're seeing these attempts to fake the market by Trump and co. Like, there was a huge oil short selling scheme that just happened in right before Trump did his announcement saying that they were going to do a month-long ceasefire, and then the markets dumped really hard. That was actually a fake out, and somebody profited enormously off of this. And it's interesting because I have a suspicion that when this administration is done with, regardless of how the war ends, the way that it's going to, like the Trump administration is going to progress is, I think in 2028, I'm not sure if Trump himself can be charged on double jeopardy, because I know that they were attempting to charge him with something. I forget exactly what was going on there. But they're going to attempt to jail as many of the current administration as possible for the fiasco that's going on here and all of the corruption that is going on as well. It could get pretty ugly. Israel's nuclear doctrine, the way that it works is they formally, well, I mean, it's not formal because they don't announce their own nuclear weapons. It's known as strategic ambiguity. But the way that Israel's nuclear strike doctrine works is basically if the state of Israel's physical existence is at threat, that's when they reserve the right to use nuclear weapons. And this war does not meet that criteria. I don't think that they would go for that because they can still sacrifice the United States as a means of getting out of the war, and that's what they will do. And as a matter of fact, I have a suspicion that the Israelis might be realizing that their time with the United States is up, and there could actually be some pretty severe blowback due to their history of occupying the U.S. government and blackmailing and bribing the leadership against the interests of Americans. There could be enough blowback that they're trying to do as much damage to the United States as possible in order to render it greatly weakened when they are no longer under Israel's influence and control. We could see that be their long-term strategy when it comes to the United States. And we know that they're willing to do this sort of thing because this is what Ukraine was used for. Like Ukraine was basically turned into a torpedo and launched at Russia. Even though they've done a lot better than people expected that they were going to do against Russia, like it's turned into basically like World War I trench warfare. The fact remains is that like just due to the differences in the population size and in the manpower and in the manufacturing capacity, the resources, like we all know that Russia will eventually win. It's not even like whether we want them to or not. It's just the logistics of it are going to line up that way, and it's going to devastate Ukraine. But the goal is to damage Russia as much as possible. They don't really care what happens to Ukraine. I think that's how Israel is viewing this war with Iran at this point, is that any damage that's done to the U.S. could even be seen as upside, because it means like they'll be weaker when they turn on us. That could be the logic that they're coming to. And let me see here. Israel acquiring a Greek island for Israelis to potentially flee to. I do think what they want to do there, because their main concern is that Israelis, because they have European American passports, especially the middle and upper classes, they can just leave at any time. And buying a Greek island would give the wealthier Israelis a place to flee to without leaving the country. And that could be what their goal is there. I could see that being the logic. There will be no ceasefire until March 31st. Oh yeah, definitely. That was a good trade. It's not going to happen. I mean, Iran at this point has lost way too much to tolerate a ceasefire. If they were to do a ceasefire now, I could see them actually getting overthrown by whoever made the ceasefire would get overthrown by the hardliners, and the ceasefire would immediately be ended. They're kind of like, Iran's kind of in like a Japan scenario where the IRGC, because they've assassinated so many civilian leaders of the government in Iran, the IRGC, YouTube banned your comment. What, do you guys know what you were talking about? Hang on a second. Let me make sure that this is connected to live chat. There we go. Yeah, I do have some auto censorship for certain words. Obviously, I'm not concerned about the content itself. I'm more concerned about YouTube taking me down. Because if you guys remember my first stream, I just switched it to live chat, by the way. If you guys remember my first stream, I lost like the first 1/3 of it because, do you hear a lot of mouse noises? I can move back from my microphone. As long as it's not too quiet. Is this okay? Anyways. If you guys remember, I lost the first third of my original stream, my first stream, because I said something related to Hamoudi self-deleting, and that was enough to nuke the stream. So I think that they've backed off somewhat from the censorship. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I don't really want to take any chances. And that's also why some of my streams I privated. Yeah, so, yeah, just use circumventing words, you know what I mean? And actually, that's something I wanted to talk about, because there's this concept called the Esau gambit. And if any of you have been on 4chan poll, yeah, Hamoudi is probably doing well. Pretty sure his family is pretty well off. So, I doubt that he's actually suffering too much. Anyways, though, there's this concept called the Esau gambit, and the idea is that like when the usual suspects get cornered on an existential crisis, they will split into two groups and have like a civil war, more or less. And the idea of the 4chaners, poll-tard types, is that this is entirely cynical, and that they're doing this as like a strategy to avoid being clocked as like a single entity. I don't actually believe that. I believe that it is actually a sincere crisis, and I developed this from reading books on the topic, like Kevin McDonald's books on the usual suspects, like Separation and Its Discontents. Like, if any of you are old school antiseptics, you know about the Culture of Critique that was written by him, I believe in the 90s. He wrote an earlier book that is... because Culture of Critique was focused on their activities in the modern period, especially with regards to immigration and cultural stuff. Whereas Separation and Its Discontents goes back throughout history. It goes to like the Spanish Inquisition. It goes to medieval Europe. It goes to the Roman Empire, like the first interactions in the Roman Empire. It goes to the Maccabean Revolt. It goes to like Greek and usual suspect interactions. And what you realize is that when they're faced with an existential crisis of their identity, they do eventually split, and sometimes that split can be a very violent split. Not always, but oftentimes it is. The Christianity versus Rabbinic Judaism split is a really good example of this. And, hang on a second. Yeah, I think Hamudi was just looking for content. I mean, I'm not going to, maybe I shouldn't assume the worst, but I don't think that he was in a desperate situation, especially as a Syrian. If he's somebody with money, I guarantee you that he could find a decently attractive Syrian woman from like his home village or something to marry, if that's what he wanted to do. Now, I know there's a lot of guys that don't want to go down that route, and I can appreciate that, but it is still an option. You know, I would still say arrange maxing is better than no options. That's just my issue on it. But yeah, Philippines is a mess, man. A lot of these poorer countries, they're going to get hit hardest first because they don't have the reserves, right? Ironically, they don't have the money to afford to maintain fuel reserves in the first place. So they end up getting hit the hardest. And yeah, it's unfortunately, I'm beginning to wonder if the Geomax option is still going to be tolerable because of the economic instability that this is going to result in. It's going to be very difficult, I think. And yeah. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, like people don't think of the Philippines as really a dangerous country. It's mostly not. But it's when things get desperate, you're going to start seeing that. Like people are going to be willing to do things like attempt to rob foreigners or kidnap them. You know, like I would say the threshold's higher, but once they reach that threshold, then it's going to become dangerous, especially as first world Western countries and European countries. We lose influence and we become less able to protect our citizens abroad. I think it's going to get harder and harder as time goes on. Yeah, exactly. We're all in survival mode right now. And, Aliyad is from Iraq. Oh, man, I heard a story out of Iraq where the Popular Mobilization Forces, which are like Shia militias, they're like Iran-aligned militias, they had an agreement with the U.S. Garrison in Baghdad, I believe. And they allowed the U.S. garrison to leave through the west into Jordan. And then as soon as they completed their evacuation, they bombed the people that they negotiated with and killed all the leadership. Like, this is America. Yeah. I'm not so sure if the Middle East is going to become the next Thailand, because I believe that religiosity is going to keep declining, but I don't think that's the same as sovereignty, like the way that these countries are sovereign. Because if Iran wins this thing, and winning doesn't mean like occupying the United States or like occupying the Gulf states, it means pushing the U.S. out of the region. That's gonna I think give that entire region, like the entire civilization of the Muslim Middle East, a boost in morale and status. And I think that will offset a lot of the just be XYZ that we see with like formerly colonized, conquered regions of the world, like the Philippines. And will Foyds be forced into prostituting? It's possible. Though on the other hand, I do wonder, because oftentimes they're able to like digitally make money. I remember seeing this meme about in China where there's like these delivery drivers in China that will they will donate to like e-girls online, And then the e-girls will order food from some random restaurant, and these guys will drop it off, and then they'll get a tip, and it's like a circulating economy. It's like the e-girl circulating economy. I have a feeling that we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. It's going to become less and less physical. I think in a lot of cases, because of just lack of exposure, Gen Z is almost becoming... they're becoming like phobic of touch, like escorting will almost be seen as too invasive by a lot of them, I think. And yeah, people won't risk anything for a foreigner. Yeah, 100%. There's this guy I followed. I haven't seen his content recently, but there's this English guy who's in the Philippines, and he talks about how, like, if you get in any kind of legal trouble in the Philippines, the government and everyone is going to side with the locals over you. Like, you're going to be at a default disadvantage in their legal system, because why would they give you any advantages? And that's how a lot of these countries operate. Like, Thailand's the same way, even though Thailand is much more professional than the Philippines. Yeah, you hear the phone again. You also hear a dog. Thailand's a lot more professionally made up in terms of their image than the Philippines, but it's the same thing there. Like, the way that their countries don't exist for foreigners to come in and, like, take advantage of easy access to women. That's not what these countries exist for. They exist to drain your resources. That's the reason. And if you don't have any resources to drain, or the cost of draining those resources doesn't justify the amount that they get, they're just going to cut it off. So you have to be prepared for that. You're not actually, because I think a lot of Geomaxers and Westerners, Europeans who go to these countries, they almost have the same sort of psychology as the 19th century Europeans that had extraterritoriality, And what that was in the colonial period, Europeans were exempt from local laws in a lot of colonized countries, or countries that were under the power of Western powers, because obviously they had military supremacy. So you could get away with anything in these countries, and the laws didn't apply to you. But it's like this isn't the relationship that these countries have with us now. So, oh yeah, apparently Thailand is tightening up their visa requirements, or they're considering it at least. They're thinking of dropping the 60-day visa free and going only to 30 days. And it's unfortunate because it's not every single person that's causing these issues. It's like, I remember seeing some specific examples. There's Russians, there's Israelis, Chinese, and English, like from the UK. I mean, those four groups are known to cause a ton of problems in Thailand, and as a result, the rest of us have to suffer for it. Like, you cannot open up a bank account in Thailand. Like, you used to be able to open up a bank account on a tourist visa. I mean, even then, that sounds kind of silly, to be honest with you. But still, you could do it. But they abolished that, and it's because there was these Chinese crypto scammers that were using Thailand as a base of operations, and they would use like a Thai bank account as a base of operations. And as a result, none of us can open bank accounts now. So it's like these problem countries make it worse for everyone else. Yeah, it's pretty much, yeah. They also, apparently there's a ton of, now, they don't really make a distinction between Russians and Ukrainians, because both of them are fleeing the war, largely, right? So there's apparently a large Russia/Ukrainian expat community in Thailand as well. that they're known for causing issues to. And in some cases, like apparently entire cities are being taken over by these groups. Like, oh yeah, Indians as well. Yeah, how could I have forgotten Indians? Of course, Indians are becoming a huge problem. Largely because of their sheer numbers, just overwhelming everything with their numbers. And also because they're extremely cheap. Like, they don't even fly into Thailand. They take the bus. So it's pretty funny. And yeah, actually, I know a Ukrainian guy who's currently trapped in Ukraine. He's managed to avoid the press gangs, thankfully, but his long-term plan was to go to Vietnam after the war is over with, if he can keep avoiding the press gangs, which he has thus far been able to do. Hopefully that's still an option. The problem is that with the the energy crisis that's going to happen, that's going to hit a lot of economies quite badly. Some worse than others, but it's going to hit the entire global economy quite badly. And a lot of us, if we're going to these Geomax locations, the idea is we can make like money as a like as an expat doing something even as simple as like English tutoring or some other online job. Those options are going to become more and more scarce as time goes on. You know, Mercer is becoming an Indian. Deny this in an Indian accent. I can't do the Indian accent. I can only do it occasionally. And oh, you hear a dog back there. Yeah, maybe I am in India because you hear like random phones and you hear dogs. So maybe there's something to that. So, anyways, let me see here. Yeah, Vietnam is number one, especially for cost of living. Again, though, the problem is, like, how do you get a sustained income in these places? That's the big concern. I'm not sure if there's going to be the money there. Yeah, English tutoring was sort of what I was thinking too, but I don't know if the money's going to be there for the services. Unless you can do it online. But even then, like during COVID, there was a whole bunch of these like online unofficial tutoring sites that you could make. It wouldn't be a lot of money. It would be like $12 an hour US. But that's a lot of money in Vietnam or even Thailand or Philippines. It's a lot of money. But those opportunities, they're dependent on people having disposable income on the other end that would be willing to pay for these lessons. Is that income going to be there? I don't know. Yeah, IT, remote jobs. See, the problem with IT, software development, anything like that, if it can be done remotely, it can also be outsourced. You really have to have... Well, actually, what's funny is it's not even that you have to have a skill that's sufficiently advanced that you can, you're not replaceable, because I even know guys who are senior developers and software engineers that are stuck in very specific locations, like certain parts of the US. They can't even leave their state, because if they leave their state and they go to a cheaper state, this immediately drops their salary down to as low as the state expenses can justify. It's quite brutal. Yeah, Hanoi, I've heard, is also very polluted. Saigon, the only problem is with Vietnam is that the further south you go, the more like, how do I put this politely? The more jungle monkey the locals start to look. You know, like if you look at North Vietnam, they look very much like Chinese people. Whereas if you go further south, they get sort of browner and browner. And I mean, it becomes a personal preference thing. But I would say most guys, if they could choose, they would prefer further north. The beggars can't be choosers, you know? Yeah, it's data engineering. These are nice ideas, but are they going to be sustainable? That's the question. Just give me 1 second here, guys. Do you have any SNP predictions? I don't know if I should be giving those out. I'm pretty sure there's legal liability there if you give those out. How's dating in Canada been for you? That's a good question. I don't know, actually, because I don't think I've had a date in Canada since... when was the last time? Since I was in college the first time around, which was almost 10 years ago. Yeah, it's that bad. Like, the thing is, people are so focused on survival in Canada that we're not even thinking about making like finding a girl and whatever. We're just thinking about making money and surviving at this point. Okay. Yeah, if I was going to give advice on the S&P 500, I would need to get legal liability protection, and I would probably charge for it if I was confident enough to give out financial advice. Yeah, Southerner are just a bunch of Pepe the Frogs. You know what that reminds me of? Do you remember that Lao Y 87 or something? And he has like this wife with the really smushed in face and bulgy eyes, and there was all these memes that were made about her. I wish I had saved those memes. They were so funny. Is it bad or because you only find white women attractive? No, I think any race of women can be attractive. But I will say that I think that the proportion of attractive women, just like with men, differs based on race. You know, some races have a greater proportion of tolerably attractive women than others. The part of Canada I'm in is mostly, like most of the non-whites here are either Native American or they're Indian or they're black. And neither of those options are particularly nice, though again, beggars can't be choosers. But yeah, Indians in particular, if we're talking about like younger women or like women that are of the age, like in my age bracket, which would be like 20s and 30s, it's going to be mostly Indians and some natives, if we're talking non-white women. And Indian women are just not appealing. I think I saw one attractive Indian woman at a Tim Hortons the other day. And that was like it was like 1 in 100 that I'll see that are attractive. And by attractive, I don't even mean like hot. I mean like tolerably, like median white woman attractive. Yeah, asking for money up front. You know what? I have a recording that I got from a group chat that I was in on an alt a while ago, like undercover, because I was doing a bit of research into women's spheres, like feminist spheres, for example. And I got this recording of this one girl. I'll see if I can track it down. And she talks about how she, when she was 20 or 21, she did this experiment on Tinder where she put in her profile, I'm not actually looking to date anyone. I'm just looking for people to buy me food. Like, and you know, foodie calls is a meme, but she didn't even do it as like an undercover thing or like a subversive thing. She did it as an open, like, I only want food. I'm not interested in actually dating anyone. So only right swipe me if you're going to buy me food. And she actually got a ton of right swipes and a ton of attention. And she actually went on multiple dates with these guys. And the way that they interpreted it was, it was like, this is like their entry fee. It's like that they get to pay this fee to have the opportunity to apply. And it almost made me think of how this could work in the job market, where imagine if employers, instead of doing these games where they do ghost jobs or they do all these runarounds or like they use AI to parse through applications. Imagine if they just charged up front, like we're going to charge you $40 for an interview, and it's like that's going to be the entry fee for interviews. I could actually see that happening at some point. It'd be like cutting out the middleman. And let me see here. And yeah, the Indian women that are attractive, they tend to be the Punjabi ones, or the ones that are northwestern Indian, which I suppose makes sense. Those are the ones that are a little whiter, but yeah. So you'd rather jack off with your hand at home than bang a puja. I would say if I was 18 or 19, probably I would be horny enough at that point where I would be going after anything I could find. But at my age now, my threshold has reached a point where I don't need that. I can tolerate, and I've also been on my own for long enough that it doesn't bother me like it would have when I was a teenager. Yeah, they'll scam you $40 for an interview. That's 100% what's going to happen. I see it coming. Maybe, okay, here's one upside. If you at least have savings, like I think when it comes to getting a job remotely when you get a job remotely to work overseas and like take advantage of the cheap cost of living, if you can either avoid that requirement by having savings or investments or something, the demand destruction that's coming from this oil crisis and energy crisis, that could actually drop prices for other goods in the long run quite a bit. So it actually might make it easier to geomax, because the poorer countries, the third world countries, are going to be worse hit than the first world countries. Like they're going to be more economically damaged by what's happening now. And that means that they're going to be relatively poorer than our countries. And once things reestablish themselves, you're going to see the cost and wages diverge even further from like the third world and the first world. So maybe in that sense, it could be like advantageous in some way. Am I low T? I don't think so. Like, it's not that I'm not horny. It's that I'm so used to being on my own that I don't like crave the need for like physical experiences with women that I would have needed when I was younger. I think it's more like you just get used to it. And ironically, I think this is one of the bad things about being on your own for a long time. In addition to becoming kind of mentally eccentric, from lack of exposure to women, like socially, I mean, you also become so used to being alone that it becomes kind of difficult to change that. Even if you were to get into a relationship, it would be kind of hard for you to get back into what would be like a normal physical relationship with a woman. Have you heard this story on X about this? Oh God. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I've heard this story. Yep. You know, there are a lot of people that I've talked to about that were saying, oh, this has to be like some kind of fetish or something. This guy must have had he was like getting off in some weird way to this. And I'm like, no, like if you've actually met some of these evangelical types, like they genuinely believe that it's like you become a different person when you're baptized. And it's like this other person that existed in your past is not you anymore. It's very peculiar. But, oh yeah. Yeah, I was one of those subhuman normies that needed human interaction as a teenager. I only became hardened to it and a stone cold chud in my 20s and 30s. You see the future with this awful job market, marriage prospects. Honestly, Here's the sad part. As time goes on and the global population ages, you are going to see women, and this will be a hot take, but it's going to become true. You're going to see women become like a strategic asset the same way oil is. You're going to see countries start treating young women with the same kind of protectionist attitude that we treat these strategic energy resources and other resources with, because there is going to be like a global shortage of women, more or less. It's like you already see it in first world countries, but they're just ignoring it, right? They're not going to be able to ignore it forever. Like I've had this argument with other people, and we're like, well, they can just keep going the way that they're going. I don't think so, because there are serious countries, Like, for example, Iran, as an example, is a serious country. Israel is a serious country. They're going to treat these things seriously because they are actually in a much more precarious situation than America is, or even like Western European countries are, that have the ability to ignore these things and just let them decay. So, and unfortunately, this is also going to exacerbate tribalism, more or less. Which, again, I'm not some kind of like anti-nationalist or anything like that. But I do think that the nationalist issue has been weaponized by a lot of people to get their own interests achieved at the expense of the people that they're manipulating. So, like, it's quite sad, actually, because I've had this argument with leftists. I had this debate with a leftist the other day where I was like, you realize that if the left-wing parties, and this is like a progressive leftist who's a socialist, I was like, you could get everything that you're asking for here, like all of the economic stuff that you're asking for. You could get that if you just didn't like stop supporting open borders, mass immigration. You could get all that. You would sweep the board, because like this demographic anxiety is what these people on the right, like the Trump faction, for example, in America, this is what they've used to get themselves into power, because you refuse to compromise on this. If you took that away from them, there'd be nothing left that they could offer, because all of their positions are against the interests of the average person, except for their promises on immigration that they never fulfill anyways, right? So, yeah, I'm about to be drafted into the Canadian battalion. That's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to be on the front lines in, what is it, in the Baffin Island, or those islands on the coast that are bordering Russia. That's where we're going to be stationed. It's going to be us and the rest of the Indians that recently immigrated here. Normies will never collectivize. No, they won't. Yeah, Darzog, you have the right idea. I don't want a black pill in the sense that, like, discouraging people from trying to improve their conditions. My main concern is just trying to make sure that I have the right idea about what's going on. I want to have the most realistic understanding of the situation, so that when I do make a decision to make a huge change in my life, I'm making the right decision. I'm not going to regret it, I do think, like, I can still tell you that things have not improved for us in Western countries. I will say, though, that geomaxing is not necessarily an optimal strategy at this point now. We have to wait to see how this energy crisis shakes out. Because the countries that we're looking at for geomaxing, those are countries that are going to be hit quite hard by this, right? Yeah, should Trump have annexed Canada? Oh, yeah. Well, no, the reason why they would never do that is not because the Canadians would nobly resist it. Like, this is what's really funny when I see people, like Canadians, like puff their chests out, mostly boomers puff their chests out about America. All America would have to do is take the highway between Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal, cut that highway off, and they've just cut the population in half. Like they severed the connection between two sides of the country. Like there would be no way for us to defend ourselves if America invaded. So it's being adversarial to America is just complete lunacy from a Canadian perspective. But the reason why the U.S. will never annex Canada is because they get everything they want from us already for cheaper than if they had just annexed us. If they annexed us, we would then get access to the U.S. dollar and American wages, and our living standards would go up dramatically. Whereas if they just import oil and other resources from Canada, especially if they can bully Canada into agreements that are disadvantageous to us, they benefit a lot more from that. Like, why would they annex Canada? There's no reason from the American point of view. Yeah, you need multiple solutions, and yeah, 100%. I've thought of setting up ad revenue on YouTube. I don't think that there would be a lot of money in that, though. That's the thing. It might be a little bit of something extra if I just keep up consistent streams. But, yeah, remains to be seen. I've investigated English language tutoring along with some other people, and they're pretty saturated right now. So I don't know if English tutoring is going to be, at least not remotely, it's not going to be an option. There's probably still in-person opportunities, but again, I don't know if I would bet on that. I don't know if I would travel across the world with that as a my number one solution, my primary solution. Thoughts on Eastern Euros being treated better by Westerners, though not like an equal, than by their own countrymen who may or may not be entirely brown? I don't know, Anton. That's a good question. Eastern Euros seem to treat everyone kind of with. It's kind of ironic because Western Europeans will be very polite, but they'll often be quite cynical about it. Whereas Eastern Europeans will be quite unpleasant and even hostile in terms of how they interact with each other. But there's no covert element to it. Like, it's not like they're hiding their personal opinions. They just sort of wear it on their sleeve. I think a lot of people find that refreshing, to be honest. Grifter on ScamTube. should I do masculinity courses? Because I don't know if I would be that good at that. I don't consider myself I'm not like a non-masculine guy, but I think I'm pretty average when it comes to that. I don't think there's any, I couldn't Andrew Tate Max, I don't think. But I'll be honest, personally struggling like this is a battle I don't have energy for. I'd rather be homeless in some warm part of the States. Yeah, I know how you feel. It's rough. I was looking at some stats for Canada, and for young people in Canada, 25 and under, though it probably also applies for us in our 30s, the average happiness, and I know happiness is difficult to measure. I wouldn't use it as a precise metric, but we fell from number 8 or something, or number 7 for the young people, down to number 75. And we're actually, the Philippines ranks higher than us, allegedly, on happiness. Now, again, happiness is very difficult to quantify, but I think going from 7 to 75th, there's something being communicated there. There's a pretty huge collapse in living standards if you get that dramatic of a shift in 10 years. Oh, look, Max courses. Yeah, there are people that will do the face rating thing. Okay, I'm not going to cast shade at guys who in our sphere who will do face rating as I guess a passive stream of income. It's not something I would do. Not just because I don't really understand it that well. I'm not a LMS guy. I'm vaguely familiar with it, but not anywhere near where I could assign ratings to people. I don't know, man. It does feel pretty grifty, you know? I have people telling me I should be grifting more, right? But, I don't know. There's some internal resistance there. And yeah, Darzag. Well, what I found was really funny is that there was you and I think one other guy who you'd get into arguments, I think, about like red pill versus black pill, but it would be in Hungarian. So we would just get like a whole bunch of Hungarian in the live chat. It'd be pretty funny. More cheap food that'll kill you in 5 years. But in the Philippines, they got a community and a social life. That's true. You know, to be honest with you, I was talking to some normies. I know this is like outing myself as a crypto normie. I'm not. But I sometimes interact with normies because I have family, right? And I was even getting the impression from some Canadians that they... like even the ones that are in relationships with like a white guy with a white woman, and then they're both Canadian, where they're actually talking about moving places like Thailand, like both of them, because the quality of life is just better for what it would cost them. And it's like, damn, man, that's crazy when you reach that point. And Canada, okay, I could understand this for like certain European countries where they're resource poor and they're overpopulated, like the UK, for example. The UK has limited resources, and it's quite densely populated. Canada is one of the most, like per capita, if we ignore the Indians that we've pumped in the country, we're one of the most resource-wealthy countries per capita on the planet. We should be like Saudi Arabians, like that kind of living standard. If we had a government that prioritized their citizens the same way the Saudis did. It's actually crazy what we could be, like the quality of life we could have. But we don't. Like we have, as soon as governments realize that they can manipulate and stay in power by engineering the population through immigration for their voter base, as soon as governments realize that, like democracy became obsolete as a form of government. Because you can just undermine it through mass immigration. And it's like, I remember having this conversation with like immigrants in Canada. And I was like, because they're talking about like, especially the Indians, they will like laugh at whites and say, oh, look at you're dying of fentanyl overdoses. You all suck. And it's like, Canada doesn't need you. Canada needs us more. And I'm like, you know, if we go back to 1970, Canada was a democratic government and it was like 99% white. Or something along those lines. And it was almost all from like my background. But like, we're not even talking recent European immigrants. It's like of the whites here, it was like 70-80% Anglo, Irish, Scottish, French. Like that was the background. And that government represented our people and our interests. And from the point of view of that government at that time, which existed for hundreds of years before that, representing our interests. And then if you fast forward to now and you look at their descendants today of the people that created that government and put that government in place to represent them and their children, it's been a complete disaster for us. This government has failed us catastrophically from our point of view. Like from this point of view, because of mass immigration, it's allowed democracy to fail as a system. And I think over time, people are just going to realize this. You're already seeing Zoomers. There was like a poll done in the UK. And it was like a crazy percentage of Gen Z. It was like 45% of Gen Z or something that said, and this was like men and women. So I imagine for men it was even higher of a percentage because you know how women are. That said that they would be okay with a dictatorial government or like a non-democratic government if they were able to solve the problems better than the democratic government. That's actually enormous. Like that would be unimaginable even 10 years ago. Darzog, a certain group of people undermining everything. Darzog, I wish I could say it was them in Canada, It's not. I wish I could blame them. I wish I could. This is entirely on us. We created the circumstances for this. It was the construction lobby for housing, and it was the rent extraction industry and the financial industries that all are upstream from those industries. And it's also, there's an entire class of quote unquote small business owners in Canada that are effectively using slave labor from these third world countries like India that are very cheap and disposable, because there's always this constant glut of people that need work. So as soon as someone becomes inconvenient, you can fire them and get someone else in. And the only reason that these businesses are still operating is because they are able to use this cheap slave labor. And if they had to deal with the actual labor pool in Canada, they would go bankrupt because their business model is shit. And it's really hilarious to see these people, like these people think of themselves as these like free market entrepreneurs. We're not on the government teat. We're not on the government dole. We're independent small business owners. And then you realize, actually, you guys don't want to operate in a free market environment where the labor supply is restricted, because then the labor supply is subject to supply and demand. And then you actually have to deal with labor as a scarce resource. But as soon as that becomes a threat to them, they start squealing and demanding that the government overthrow the market balance of labor and flood the country with immigrants to circumvent the free market's price mechanism for labor as a scarce resource. It's really ridiculous. It's disgusting. Yeah, Canadians are so liberal, they like smell of their own farts. You know, I there's something distasteful about bashing one's own background, you know? Like, I try to avoid it, but a lot of criticism that we get is 100% deserved. As a people, I mean. It's, yeah. So I can't even disagree with that. If a dictatorship does in fact come, what stops the dictator from being just like Putin? Nothing, really. I mean, the dictator could be even worse than that. It could be like a Boris Yeltsin. But at least when you have a dictatorship, there's no longer this fake notion of manufacturing consent through elections. And they actually have to worry about the young fighting age male population posing a threat to them politically. Like, that's the main threat that they'll be concerned with. And as a result, they will act in a more rational way than they otherwise would act. Like, I remember, if you remember my video that I made about China, where I talked about the how I think the AI synthetic companions are going to be integrated into the Chinese system, and it's going to actually like turn into like a state-managed population, like reproductively managed population. The reason why they can do that is because their government is not democratic. And so unlike our governments that have to worry about all these different voter blocks that have artificial power that they wouldn't have in a non-democratic system, they can focus on who is a real threat to our power. What's the real threat to the CCP? Politically and militarily. It's fighting age men. Those are the people that they have to satisfy first and foremost with their government. And as a result, this is why they are doing what they do. By contrast, because we have this political system that it operates through voting, our governments can just ignore their actual interests with regards to fighting age men being a threat to them, because it just doesn't register in their political calculus because of democracy. Because our votes are worth the same as any other vote, right? Like an 80-year-old woman's vote is worth as much as our vote. Even though the 80-year-old woman could pose zero threat to the government, we could pose a threat to the government. And that's not, by the way, for YouTube, this is not saying we will. I'm not advocating anything. I'm just saying, as a population, these young men are much higher risk for unrest than like elderly women. And government should prioritize that group as an interest group. for their own survival. Yeah, Westerners had it so well that, yeah, actually behave. Yeah. We actually, it's funny. We got some gypsies in Canada, and they behaved so atrociously. I forget exactly what it was. It was like scamming, robbing. It was something along those lines. It was so atrocious, their behavior, that it actually caused gypsies to get banned from Canada. They got kicked out of Canada and banned very quickly. Now, if Canada bans you, you're a real problem group. If Canada's willing to ban you, because we don't ban anyone. Yeah, Baltic excess males, stay alert. Yeah. The Baltic is risky because you're small countries, so you don't have a lot of political clout. And yeah, I think the G word is okay because it sounds a lot like Egyptian, so I don't think that they can algorithmically ban it. So I think I'm safe saying it. Who knows, though? Maybe I'll get taken down. Hopefully not. But yeah, they managed to get banned in Canada, of all places. And yeah, the Baltics is really dangerous because, like the Baltic region alongside Scandinavia, like they have the reputation in terms of the physical attractiveness of women that Scandinavian countries have, and also like Northern Slavic countries. But they don't have the baggage of like feminism that Scandinavian countries are associated with. And as a result, like I've seen Baltic women and generally Northern Slavic women get fetishized quite a lot, including by Westerners. And it's interesting because like there was a period of time when in the 90s after the Soviets collapsed, like the former Soviet countries were seen as a paradise to go pick up a woman if you're like an American or something. And it's like as soon as these women discovered their value, it's like done. Dunzo. They know exactly what they're worth now. And they're not gonna tolerate anything like they would what they would tolerate in the 90s when they were still in the price discovery phase, to put it in a really vulgar sense, Why doesn't Putin just abolish women's rights? Because Putin is still LARPing as, like, he's not trying to be this Oriental dictator, even though it would be better for him if he was. He's still trying to pretend that he's like a misunderstood Democrat, and that Russia is this presidential republic that is embattled by these imperialist forces. Like they still sort of cling on to that leftist notion of like, we're the plucky democracies versus these imperialist powers, that sort of thing. I think it's a losing position. Like when I've talked to Russians about this, they're sort of positioning themselves as like, we're the good white people and we're fighting the bad white people that are the oppressors, and we're the good guys. We've always supported the third world. And I'm like, listen, man, they still see you as white, and that doesn't necessarily mean, like, I'm not somebody who believes that there's like a permanent race war between these different groups of people. That's not what I'm saying. But they still will see you as an outsider, the same way that they see us as an outsider. Like, you're never going to be considered one of the like fellow people of color. You're not going to be seen as like the white people of color. You know what I mean? And even though Russia is individually an influential country, China is like much more powerful in terms of economy, right? And so China will be able to dictate terms to some extent, and the Russians will be sort of integrated into them economically, and they'll just gradually. It's almost like what happened. Like if you look at the history of organisms, mitochondria began as a bacteria that got swallowed up by an archaea cell, and then the bacteria, just as it became symbiotic with the archaea cell that surrounded it, it began to lose functions. And I think you would see this with Russia, where it would just, as China is able to saturate it in terms of its industry, it's just going to like lose more and more economic functions until it just becomes like a gas pump and a military bruiser that can be sent around to beat up countries that China doesn't want to deal with personally. Like, I could see that being the long-term outcome for them. It's not good for them. They would be much better off allied with the rest of Europe, which, and to be fair, European governments are also suicidal, right? So it's not like the Russians. Putin's original strategy was to try and unite Europe so that they could be an independent bloc versus America. Like, that was Putin's original strategy. That's why they targeted him. That's why the Americans did. Because that's the major threat to America is Europe. It's not China. Yeah, Brazil is the same situation. Oh, yeah. Well, Brazil has, it has a lot of, ironically, from what I've been told from Brazilians, they've gotten like American categories of race imposed on them that didn't exist before. Where it's like the Latin American conception of race. I know that there's some Brazilians don't like being called Latin Americans because they see it as like, they're not Spanish, they're Portuguese, but you know what I mean. Like, they had the same concept of race, where it's like everybody's sort of mixed together, and it's almost like a class signifier than like a straight up, like, sharply defined racial separation between like blacks and pardos and whites. But now they're getting these American racial categories imposed on them, and you're seeing like a lot of like mixed race Brazilians identifying as blacks because there's affirmative action benefits now to identifying as black. It's kind of crazy. And it's actually crazy how destructive the American categories are pretty much anywhere that they get imposed. And yeah, Russia's not going to collapse. It's going to be a disaster for Ukraine, though. Like, this whole war has been a disaster for Europe. Iran war is also going to be a disaster for Europe. So in this regard, America is still achieving its goals in keeping Europe weak. That's the main goal. And yeah, that's how shitlibs view Israel as a white oppressive state. That's true, and a lot of the Jews are still in denial about this. And they're still trying to argue that they're not actually white, they're Jewish, and there's some special distinction. Like, no, they don't care. Like, Israel should not have existed after 1945. Because it didn't come into existence until 48, but it never should have existed in the first place, according to the rules that they established in the Nuremberg trials, where taking land through war is considered a war crime. Well, that's exactly how Israel established itself. Like, the only reason it was able to establish itself through the UN is because decolonization had not happened yet. So the first UN assembly that created the mandatory, like the splitting of Palestine into an Israeli half and a Palestinian half, that was ratified by pretty much only Europeans in the UN, because there was no non-European. It was all still colonial country or colonial territories. They became independent countries after that. But even then, like, Israel then claimed large segments of the Palestinian portion, except for the West Bank and Gaza, in the 48 war and the 56 war. And since then, they've been sort of fighting a losing battle, politically, I mean. And it's really their entire strategy. Like, the reason why they parade feminists and like women in the IDF, and they'll parade like the black Jews, and they'll have like gays everywhere. Like, the reason why they do that is because they're trying to like justify their existence. They know they have this original sin of being a settler state, a settler colonial state like South Africa. And they're trying to justify their settler colonial state by saying, well, look, but we're the only state that has all these gays everywhere. We're the only state that has feminists in our military running around in fatigues. But that's not an argument. That doesn't justify the settler colonial state. And my theory is that eventually this is what I meant by the Esau crisis. What you see with the Jewish community is when they have two contradictory positions and they're facing an existential pressure. Eventually that pressure reaches a boiling point where these two positions, they erupt into a civil war over determining which direction the community's going in. And like the first example of this was the Maccabean revolt, if you know your history. The Maccabean revolt was where the Jews revolted against their own rulers who were heavily influenced by Greeks. They were Hellenized, basically. And the non-Hellenizers, it was like these radical non-Hellenizers that wanted to fight the Hellenizers, and they overthrew their Hellenistic Jewish king. That was like the first example of that civil war happening. Second example is the founding of Christianity. Because like the Jews believed that they were, like their prophecies say that the Messiah would come and establish an earthly kingdom that would rule the world, like Israel would be the center of the world. They should be the center of the world, not Rome. But then they look around in the time of Jesus where the Roman Empire is dominating the globe and the Romans are the center. And Israel, or the kingdom of Israel, Jerusalem, whatever, is this sort of Greco-Jewish satrapy in the corner without any real influence that's getting all this influence from the Latin world and the Greek world imposed on it. And it created this sort of crisis between what they saw in the prophecies versus what they were experiencing in reality. And it created these two factions. There was the what were they called? It was the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let me actually double check this. Hold on. I'm going off my memory here. Dead Sea Scrolls. There's the Qumran caves, and it involved the... Let me see here. It was a certain faction of Jews that were... let me see here. Son of God text. Here we are. Aramaic language. Trying to see here. Should have double checked this. Oh well, it doesn't. The name isn't really important. I could pull it up. There was like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and then this other group and they were like this highly esoteric sect of Judaism that believed in like the spiritual suffering Messiah. If any of you are familiar with Adam Green, Adam Green bases a lot of his conspiratorial thinking on this stuff, where it's like the suffering Messiah, the Melchizedek Messiah. And it's like the Jews created this version of interpretation, or this interpretation of their scripture, where the kingdom of Israel that was supposed to be an earthly kingdom that conquered everyone, instead they imagined it as this spiritual kingdom, and that they were going to conquer the world spiritually. And it was through conversion that they would conquer the world. And this is where Christianity emerges from. The problem with that is that once you go down that road, you then break down the barriers of separation between your community and the outsiders. And eventually this will lead to your people being dissolved into the outsiders. And this was the basis of the crisis. Yeah, that's true. I mean, Adam Green and Bjerknes, I remember that they originally had a lot of like common interactions with each other, and then they split over something really trivial. It's rather, and the thing is, I mean, Adam Green, he doesn't seem to have anything new. Like, it's always sort of focused on Chabad Lubavitch, and that they're trying to recreate the prophecies. And it's like, okay, yeah, but how can you do streams on this every other day? And it's the same thing over and over again. And it's like, oh, look, this new thing that just happened, this is exactly reflected in the prophecies or whatever. You know, I suppose it's easy to poke at other people when they're doing content, right? But at least for me, like what I noticed was you have this existential crisis, and then it erupts into a civil war, which is what Christianity and Judaism did erupt into. And eventually, because the barriers of separation were broken down, and this is, again, I was talking about Kevin MacDonald earlier in the stream. This is in his book, Separation and Its Discontents, where he talks about how, because the barriers of separation between the Jews and non-Jews, Gentiles, were broken down by the Christians, the Jews just sort of dissolved, and the Jewish Christians, they dissolved into the non-Jewish population, and they ceased to exist as a genetic group of people. So the Christians became what they are now, which is composed of like the Roman Empire populations and then later Europeans. But the Jews, of course, remained the Jews because they kept those separations in place. They maintained the circumcision. They maintained the dietary restrictions. These other elements, the rituals that are uniquely Jewish. And as a result, they maintain that separation. And what happened with the Christians is that even though they originated as a religiously anti-Jewish sect, like in terms of like they were opposing, they viewed the non-Christian Jews that rejected Jesus as heretics. That's what they started as. But what they evolved into over time in the Roman Empire is the church became this reservoir for anti-Jewish sentiment across the entire Roman Empire, because the Jews were the most successful ethnic group in the Roman Empire. They had like this vertically integrated economy where they controlled all the shipping lanes. And in fact, they maintained, by the way, as a side note, they maintained that shipping influence throughout the Middle Ages. This is one of the niches that they carved out, was shipping, especially between Christians and Muslims. But even the Roman Empire, they had that as one of their major sources of income. And as a result, they could then give themselves, other Jews, really good deals on shipping materials. And then they would come up with other agreements to reduce costs as much as possible in order to get a competitive edge for manufacturing. So it's like they would buy the ore from a certain place. They would ship it to a Jewish manufacturer who would then manufacture the goods. And then they would then ship the goods back through their shipping network to wherever else they were going. And they were undercutting everyone. They were able to outcompete these other groups. But because there was no ideologically anti-Jewish group that existed in the Roman Empire, it was all just sort of stepping on these different ethnic groups' toes. So it's like, okay, they might undercut the silverware blacksmiths in Spain, and they might undercut the winemakers in Latium, and they might undercut the olive vineyards in Greece or whatever. And individually they'll step on all these toes, but all these individual groups were too small to do anything about it, because at the time the Roman emperor actually was quite dependent on Jewish taxes. Like the Jews were able to flex their economic muscles on the Roman emperor because they could either stage really expensive rebellions or they could withhold taxes, and this would harm the Roman budget. And so the Roman emperor actually oftentimes played ball with the Jews and did not push them around and avoided causing them to be upset. And as a result, there was this enormous resentment throughout the empire, but no one was individually strong enough to stand up to them. But then the Christian church came into existence, and the church was able to absorb all of these disparate people throughout the empire and impose this collective identity on them that was culturally uniform and uniformly anti-Jewish. And as a result, this allowed the entire empire to collaborate in a hostile way against the Jewish population in the Roman Empire. And eventually, they were able to increasingly restrict and harm the interests of the Jews, and especially economically. This is the interesting part. They would restrict the ability of Jews to own slaves, Christian slaves. They would restrict their economic practices. Whenever there would be riots that would burn down synagogues in the Eastern Roman Empire in particular, because that's their stronghold of the Jewish community was the Eastern Roman Empire. Whenever they would have these like riots that would burn down a synagogue or whatever that were being stoked by Christians, the Roman emperor would then raise funds to rebuild the synagogue, and the Christian leadership would apply pressure to prevent them from rebuilding the synagogue. Like, they were really hostile. And if you look at the early church fathers, like St. John Chrysostom, that were the church fathers that were in the Roman Empire before it collapsed, they were extremely hostile, like almost like viscerally hostile to Jews, like in a way that's hard to really understand if it was just an economic, or not just an economic, just a religious conflict where you view them as heretics that need to be converted. It's like, no, they viewed them as like enemies that need to be destroyed. It's really fascinating. And eventually they succeeded. Like, people don't realize the numbers. Something like 20% of the Eastern Roman Empire's population was Jewish. 20%. That's how huge their population was in the Eastern Roman Empire. And it was dramatically reduced after that point, because it became so intolerable to exist within the Eastern Roman Empire, because the West had collapsed. By the time the church became very powerful and were able to really put the nails down on the Jews, it had become the Byzantine Empire, as they call it. That was when it became a formally Christian empire. And the Jews were driven out into the Middle East, like into the Persian Empire, Ctesiphon, which is in Iraq, the Persian Empire on one end, or they were driven into barbarian Europe to eke out a living in barbarian Europe. These were the Ashkenazi Jews. And as a result, this was like one of the ways that they were defeated, in a sense, by the church. And the church was one of the first organized anti-Semitic movements, if you want to think of it this way. And what's interesting is, oftentimes, the Jewish scholars themselves will talk about Rome in the way that I'm describing it. This is actually the Jewish perspective on Rome. That it was this, that the church was this hegemonic anti-Jewish power that was axiomatically hostile to them. And Kevin MacDonald, who is considered the arch anti-Semite by Jewish scholars now, like, he's considered like the epitome of evil, he's agreeing with them in this book. He's like, yeah, you're right. This is exactly what the church was at the time. And it was, but instead of moralizing it, where it's like, oh, actually the church is this evil force and the Jews are the good guys, the helpless victims. He's like, no, this is a conflict of interests between these two groups of people. It's not that the Jews are angelic victims and the church is evil. And it's not even that the church are the good guys and the Jews are evil. It's that these two groups of people are competing for resources, scarce resources, in a really intense environment. And this intense hostility emerged as a result of this conflict. It's not like a moralizing thing. And it's interesting because you're starting to see this, for example, another example of this, a modern example, is the hatred that you see being targeted towards Indians now. Like, Indians are getting an amount of hatred that's so intense, it's kind of hard to understand if you compare them in context to, like, other groups of people, like certain Middle Eastern populations in Europe, let's say. In terms of, or like Black Americans in the U.S., in terms of crime rates. If we're just being completely honest, Indians are not a criminal population. Like, they don't have like surprise snuggle rates that are dramatically higher than the white average. Okay, especially if you compare them again to like certain Middle Eastern groups, certain African groups. They're not really that. They're not a dangerous population, but they're hated with an intensity that is hard to really understand based on that, and it confuses even them. But then you realize it's because they are competing with the rest of us. They're competing with the rest of us on every level, like economically. And this is a far greater threat than just being like a ghettoized, hostile minority that is dangerous but is localized. So it's like, yeah, okay, the ghettos in Paris and in these other areas where these North Africans and these other unintegrated minorities are, immigrants, they're a problem, okay? Undoubtedly, they're a problem. But as long as you stay away from them, you can avoid that issue. And it's like the same with like certain black communities in the U.S., Detroit, what's that, Flint, Michigan, trying to think, like New York, inner city New York, Chicago, east side of Chicago, I believe. These are dangerous places to be. You'll probably get robbed if you go there, or mugged or whatever, but you can avoid it. Okay, you cannot avoid millions of Indians migrating into your country and competing with you at every level of the economy, from like the lowest level jobs to the highest level professional jobs. That is a far more severe threat to your way of living, to your future, like your life goals. That's a far greater threat than these migrants that are like attacking women in certain European countries, you know, in their ghettos, but they're otherwise not really participating in the economy, you know. And yeah, it's interesting because this is my favorite author, Carl Schmitt, my favorite political philosopher. He famously said, like, the political enemy is not necessarily ugly or economically unviable or stupid or whatever. He has to be an enemy just because he threatens your way of living. And you will interpret these people in these negative ways, even if it's sort of a stretch. Like, I would actually be willing to say Indians are not, there are a lot of frauds and scammers. But again, if we're comparing them to the entire third world community of potential immigrants, they're not the worst. They really aren't. Like, there was a study that came out, I think, from the Netherlands that showed the relative economic impact of immigrant groups. Indians were like break even. So they didn't really benefit, but they didn't actually take money out either. So if we're being completely intellectually honest, they're not that bad of a group. But because they are this threat economically to the rest of us for work and for resources, we interpret everything about them in the worst possible light, because these are things that we can draw on to justify our already existing hostility to them due to the threat that they pose to our way of life. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm hoping that I'm making sense here, but this is what I've noticed in Canada, because Indians have acquired this hatred that I haven't seen any other group acquire. And it's almost, here's the funny thing, I've also contributed to it. Like, I've also like violently hated Indians. And then I did some introspection to try and understand why I hated these people so much. And I realized it's because they are a political threat. Indians are the worst group, Paulo. Like, the reason why we hate Indians is because they are a greater threat, because they're not localized. Like, they are everywhere. Like, they get involved in politics. They are in every economic niche competing with us. There's an infinite supply of them, effectively. So they're actually much more dangerous than like Muslim immigrants in Europe, let's say, that are ghettoized. They're mostly on benefits. They're not working typically. They're not involved in the economy. They're not competing with you for high status jobs. And there's, you know, even though they're a young population in the Middle East, there's not that many of them. There's only about 400 million Middle Easterners, and that's of all like sub races. This is including Arabs, Iranians, etc. It's like 400 million of them in total, which sounds like a lot, but remember, the United States alone is like 340 million. So there's not actually that many of them. And anyways, I suspect that the next Esau crisis, as I've explained, the sort of Jewish civil war that breaks out, I suspect that the next one is going to come with regards to the international order that was established after the end of World War II, and like the way that the diaspora community established themselves as like the moral arbiters of the world and the ultimate victims. And they developed their moral authority through their victimhood of World War II. All of that has been completely thrown out the window due to Israel's behavior. And I think the crisis is going to come where they're going to be forced out of the left completely. They're going to be incapable of playing this game where they try and justify Israel in leftist terms, and they're just forced entirely onto the right. And this is where I have predicted I could see them attempting to integrate themselves into the European far right. Now, not all Jews are going to go along with this, but I think it's going to be like an 80-20 thing. I think 80% of them are going to go with the Zionists. They're just going to abandon the moral narrative of the post-World War II era. They're just going to throw it out the window. And there's going to be about 20% that will commit to it. And the way that it's going to work, the left is going to impose the same rules on Jews, and that you already see this in the process of happening right now. They're going to impose the same rules on Jews that they imposed on whites, where in order to be a Jew in good standing, you have to denounce your own people's collective interests. Not just with Zionists, but in general, like Jewish collective activity, because Jewish collective activity is used primarily to benefit the state of Israel at this point. This is where that sort of leftist Jewish element is going to be forced into. And it's going to be intolerable for them, because it's going to be intolerable for the same reason it's intolerable for whites, because you are effectively surrendering your own group's interests in order to be accepted by this leftist faction. So, but it's going to be even worse for Jews, because Jews are more ethnically conscious. I think there's a lot more whites that are willing to backstab our own side than Jews. Jews, I think, have, even though they've been active on the left, like when they're forced into a corner, when they're forced to choose between their Jewishness or leftism, far more of them, much larger percent, are going to choose their Jewishness than whites. Like for whites, it's like a 60-40, even just for men alone, it's like 60-40. 40% of white men are willing to backstab whites. Whereas with Jews, I think it's going to be like 90% of Jewish men are going to side with their own. Let's see here. What have you got, Anton? By the way, guys, if you really want me to read something, just send it to me as a super chat, and I will get I'll get it pop up on my screen. Otherwise, like I try to keep up with the chat, but I might miss something. So just so you guys know ahead of time. Let me see here. Base Nationalist Party wants to import 1 million Indians a year into your tiny Balkan. Oh yeah. Yeah, your country's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I can't forecast anything positive for the Balkans, unfortunately. You guys are kind of getting depopulated. Turkey is getting overrun with Afghans and Pakistanis. I almost said it the wrong way. Pakistanis and and Arabs as well. And I could see the Turks trying to invade the Balkans at some point, maybe, to try and establish new territory for actual Turks to live in. I could see them doing that. It sounds crazy, but who knows? I mean, if the Balkans get depopulated enough and there's only like 10 people left in the country, maybe they'll just try and take it. Yeah, your community's future depends on the baby females, the newborns, no young women will cause aging and death. Exactly, 100%. And here's a white pill. We've discovered a few things about what causes gender ratio differences in birth, like at birth. And one of them is stress. And now this is considered a black pill because like stress-free environments that are relatively common now, they are resulting in more babies, male babies being born than otherwise would be born. That's true. That's a downside. That's a black pill. But if we can isolate what exactly that trigger is, like what the stress triggers, and we can manually trigger it ourselves, we will be able to manipulate the gender ratio without abortion, which I think would be ideal. Because then, and if we can allow people to have control over how many boys and girls are being born without involving actual abortion, I think that you will get a situation where we will balance out the gender ratio 50-50 because people, at least for Europeans, because we don't have an entrenched misogyny the way that certain other people do that have an excess male population like India, China. We don't have that issue. So what would happen is over time is, for example, if the situation is really good for girls and really bad for boys, you'll see parents naturally select for more girls than boys. And you're already seeing this to some extent. Like if you see IVF, where they know they can select for the gender of the baby, there's a preference for girls now among IVF users. So when people are given the opportunity, like white Westerners are given the opportunity to choose the sex of their baby, they're choosing girls. And that's good because we want more girls. Then once that ratio gets balanced out, you will see more of a 50-50 split again. Like I could see us being able to naturally regulate our own gender ratio based on which gender is having a better time at the time of the conception. So there'll be a bit of a generational lag, but you will see that become a corrective thing. That's a major white pill for me. Yeah. The most important question is why all of the West have agreed to import so many Indian slaves. I call it human quantitative easing. Think of it, and it's really simple actually, and it's kind of sad how simple it is. Imagine that you have a province like Ontario, Canada. And the debt in Ontario, Canada is such that the average Ontario citizen or Ontario resident owes $40,000 per person. Well, what happens if you double the population of people in Ontario through immigration? Well, you've now halved the per capita debt burden to $20,000 per person. So if you are a government that wants to continue to spend money and borrow and spend, you can actually finance that by importing people to offset that debt load through population increase. It's human quantitative easing. The U.S. is able to do quantitative easing without that because of the world reserve currency status. They can just, because there's always a demand for U.S. dollars because everyone uses it as a medium of exchange. So they can constantly export U.S. dollars. And as a matter of fact, the global economy actually needs a certain percentage of U.S. dollars to always be in the economy. And if they do not have those U.S. dollars in the economy, if they were to start paying their debt down, like what the Rand Paul and Ron Paul Republicans want, if they started to pay their debts down, ironically, it would actually cause a liquidity crisis in the world because there would be a reduction, a dramatic reduction in U.S. dollars entering the global economy and circulating in the global economy. And this would result in a liquidity freeze up because there wouldn't be these dollars available to exchange with these other currencies. So the U.S. is kind of trapped in a way where they have to constantly have this deficit spending in order to supply the world with U.S. dollars. There's an actual economic term for it. Like this has been a phenomenon that's been known since the 60s. And there's a term for it. I forget exactly what, but it basically forces these countries into perpetual deficit spending in order to, if you're the world reserve currency, in order to supply the world with your own currency for them to use on the world market. And by the way, this is also why the petrodollar is not a thing. I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream. Petrodollar helps. It helps if you can get countries to only buy and sell oil in dollars. But if you've already established your dollar as the international medium of exchange, there's going to be so much inertia there that you don't really need it. Like even if you lose the petrodollar in the Persian Gulf, like in the Arab oil monarchies, even if they were to lose that, like it would harm them a little bit, but not really that much. And as a matter of fact, Saudi Arabia, from my understanding, has been trading oil for yuan with China for a couple of years now, actually. And like everybody was predicting, this is the end of the petrodollar. We're going to have hyperinflation in the U.S. Never happened because the U.S. is the USD's use as the global medium of exchange between countries is just too valuable. It's too convenient. Because if you were to take the entire world off of that without anything to replace it with, it would like tank economic efficiency by at least 10%. Like the cost of transactions would go up by about 10%, and that would harm the bottom line for the entire global economy. It would actually be quite painful to get off the US dollar for something else, which is why the US can abuse its dollar status, its reserve status so much and get away with it, because it takes so much inertia to pull off of that. It's kind of like how YouTube is the main hub for everybody to do streaming and videos and stuff. And it's like, why is that? Well, it's because everybody's already on YouTube. So if you get kicked off of YouTube and you're forced to make content somewhere else, it's not going to be seen. And so there's actually a reinforcing cycle there. Because YouTube is already the main platform for people to watch videos on, it maintains that status because that's where everybody wants to be, because that's where the audience is, right? It's the same with the US dollar. Everyone's already using it as the medium of exchange. So it would take an enormous amount of pressure and inertia that you would have to fight against to pull the world off of that. And there's no one else that wants to take that place either. Like China does not want to become the world reserve currency because they saw what happened to the US. They see that it will result in their deindustrialization because they cannot compete with, like the US dollar cannot compete with these other currencies because these other currencies can undercut the USD by printing. And that will cheapen their exports relative to the US. Whereas the US cannot do that because the US dollar does not go down substantially with money printing, whereas these other currencies do. You know? So that China doesn't want to have that happen to them because they see what a disaster this would be. You know, it kind of reminds me of if any of you guys have ever played Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, like any of the games in that series. If you've ever read the lore behind that game, I forget the name of the lore background. It's like something Knights or something. Anyways, the lore is that when you become a vampire, you start to, like, all of your bodily fluids are replaced with blood. And, like, all of your organs wither away except for your stomach, which becomes engorged with blood. And it's like you even start sweating blood, and you can only drink blood, of course. And it's kind of like what happened to the U.S., where everything is withered away except for their financial sector and certain tech sectors. Everything else is withered away. And the U.S. is only able to really function as this financial hub, this like global central bank, and all of its other, like its industrial capacity has been fucked. It has like these other industries, like the military industrial complex the U.S. has. It's been exposed now as just a form of corporate welfare, right? Like you have like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. They're designing these super advanced, super complex pieces of military equipment that are currently getting shot down by Iran's indigenous anti-air defense. And like the aircraft carriers that they spent billions of dollars on have been rendered obsolete by Iranian drones and missiles. Like this is humiliating, and it's shown that the whole thing was just like a glorified corporate welfare scam, right? So the U.S. is kind of like that. It's like this vampire that can only gorge itself on finance, and finance is not a productive industry either. Like, what does finance do? Finance is supposed to finance other sectors, productive sectors of the economy. The whole purpose of finance is to make it so that investor money can efficiently find sources of investment for productive returns on investment. That's the purpose of finance. It is not productive. Financial sector does not create anything in and of itself. All it's supposed to do is facilitate money from investors in the most efficient way possible into productive sectors of the economy. When all you have is a financial sector, everything else has been withered away into other countries where it's cheaper. You don't even really have an economy. You have this like vampiric economy where you have these financial overlords, and they pump money into assets like housing or whatever, and the rest of the country just exists to like provide services for these people and their money. You know, it's like I call it like a servant economy. Like they say service economy, but it's like a servant economy. The entire economy is centered around serving these people. Yeah, rulers are traditionally middlemen who produce. Yeah. Explain the situation to your GF. Oh, we got a fake cell in here. What are we going to do? I don't know if we can allow you in the comment section anymore if you're a fake cell. Sorry. No, I'm kidding. I don't know if you can. I found that when you try and explain this to women, not that I've really had the opportunity, but not personally, but like when I've had conversations online in like Twitter and whatever, when I've tried to explain this, they just lose interest. You know, it's too impersonal for them in general. Not always, but oftentimes. And yeah, China's being depopulated fast. Nigeria will own the future. I actually disagree with that. I don't think, first of all, China's population is like 900 million. Even if we're taking like because there's speculation that their numbers are faked, that they're not 1.4 billion, but they're like more like 900 million. Even if we assume that, that's still 3 times the U.S. population. Like they can go down. I would actually say, here's a hot take. I actually think Chinese standard of living, first of all, their economy will stay the same size, but their standard of living will go up as their population goes down, because right now they're like a Malthusian country. Their limit is the resources and the space in their country. If the number of people goes down, the resources per person increases and the space per person increases. They still have the same productive capacity, because it's not like the 1960s where production scales based on the number of factory workers, right? Like production is very, very efficient now. You don't need that many factory workers to produce a lot of stuff now. Now, in some cases, it's cheaper to do that. If you have a really cheap workforce, and this is what a lot of these third world countries have, like India, China, they have these really cheap workforces that they can pump out a lot of stuff with, due to the scale of their population and how little they pay them. It's actually like they either break even or they actually save a little bit by hiring a lot of these like third world laborers for $2 a day than automating everything. Like this is something I remember talking about in my economics video, Excess Mail Guide to Economics, where automation is a response to high wages, like a labor scarcity. You get automation, you get increased efficiency. If you have a labor surplus, if there's a huge saturation of workers, you don't need to have an efficient economy, right? You can have like inefficient use of labor because it's so cheap, you don't need it to be efficient. Yeah. The Nigeria part is GFL, of course. I don't know. I'm okay. Look, I mean, we all know there are certain limitations when it comes to Africa, but I'm not convinced that the situation's hopeless for them. Like, I think people get this impression that if you cannot create, like it's either you create Sweden or Switzerland, or you're like a third world hellscape. And there's no in between. I'm thinking you don't need to have one or the other. Like I think Kenya, for example, their birth rates are already going down. So they're going to have their population growth under control. And they have a lot of resources. There's a lot of corruption. They have a lot of problems, but I could see them having a pretty decent standard of living. It's kind of like, if you look at like Trinidad and Tobago, and the Indian minority in South Africa, and these other countries like Guyana, Indian Guyana, the per capita income there is like $20,000 in these countries, roughly. Like they range between like 20 and 30,000 per person per year. Now that's not the same as a Western European country, but that's a lot better than India. Like, I think the per capita income in India is like $2,400 or something, or $2,600 per year. So it's almost 10 times, or it's even more than 10 times in some cases, if they don't have this overpopulation issue. And I think for a lot of African countries, you'll see something similar, I think, because they have a lot of resources that they can take advantage of. They're not in the same situation as like Japan is or Korea, where they're resource poor and they really can only rely on their people, their workforce to produce value that they can export. They're not really in that situation. They have resources that they can take advantage of, that they can offset whatever inefficiencies they have in these other areas. Like, I actually think Africa, I think they're going to go through a really crazy time when international law breaks down. You're going to see like wars of aggression between African countries where they try and conquer each other, which is exactly what things were like before the Europeans arrived. I mean, it is what it is. But I think there will be some countries in Africa, not all of them, but some of them, that will actually be okay. Yeah. Yeah, never ask a white nationalist the race of his GF. Yeah, I mean, here's the downside, okay? Because we know that whites, men and women, generally there's an advantage there. I think in some cases it's exaggerated, both by whites, unironic white supremacists, and also in some cases in the Inky sphere there's some exaggeration, but it is there. Like, there is an advantage, and as whites become more and more scarce, the advantage that you get from turning in your white card becomes greater and greater. It's like, well, if you're a white woman, let's say, okay, you could maybe get together with a white man who's like an electrician and have like a middle to lower middle class lifestyle or whatever, and have like 2 kids that they raise in the small house. Or what happens if like a Nigerian multimillionaire who's connected to the political power structure in Nigeria approaches you to marry you. And then if you marry this guy, you're going to have like a multimillionaire to even billionaire lifestyle. It's like, well, there's going to be a lot of women who, it's not even that they're like gold diggers per se, but like circumstances will push them into choosing the latter. And it'll be the same for a lot of men too. There'll be a lot of men who, I've known cases of guys who have leveraged their, like, we know geomaxing, that's what they do. But I'm even talking about like politically connected women from these third world countries that are from like wealthy, corrupt families, and they end up snatching a local white guy as a husband, and then that guy he basically gets to live for free almost. I actually knew a case of this guy who he met this girl. He's European. I'll be vague. He's from like Central Europe, a wealthier Central European country. And there was this woman from a Latin American country, one of the poorer Latin American countries, but she is from a connected, high-value family. Like, she's from a wealthy family with political connections, and they live in like a gated community in this poor Latin American country. It's a Central American, I'll just say it's a Central American country, and they're rich in a poor country. If he, and the dilemma is like, because this girl's completely smitten with him, do you marry this girl and live in this country where you're rich but you're surrounded by poverty and violence? Or do you just continue doing what you're doing now? And this does happen. I think it's going to be a lot more common for women, because that kind of opportunity is really one that women get more than men, for sure. In general. I mean, not just white women, but just in general. But the opportunity still exists for men too, and that's actually going to put pressure on miscegenation for men and women. You know? And deleted based for a white man to live off his looks with a wealthy and connected woman. On the individual level, you could be like, yeah, I can understand, you know. Look, man, I'm not even blaming people for doing that, like either men or women. But if you look at it on a group level, it's like, well, that's just going to lead to the rapid extinction of your population, right? So it's kind of like a dangerous scenario to be in, Once you become, and ironically, the more that this happens, the scarcer the remaining white population is, and the more lucrative it is to take advantage of your scarcity. And it becomes like a feedback loop, if you get what I'm saying. It's it could potentially lead you to rapidly mix out of existence. My family members is living in Montreal and is now planning to return in Japan. Public safety and Yep. They're trying to. Yep, Ninja, 100%. Yep, they're attempting to make it very difficult to leave the country with any assets. I can't give financial advice, obviously. I will say that I hear that the NFT industry is very lucrative, and it's very subjective as well. You could sell an NFT of like a pixel art for $1 million, and because it's like a regular art gallery, like there's a reason that mobsters love art, right? Mobsters love buying art because you can put any price tag on art. But that's completely unrelated to what you were talking about. Completely unrelated. China is already practicing gene editing. I don't know if that's ever going to happen on scale. I think it's going to be more economical, because you have to remember, gene editing, that takes quite a bit of, that's very intensive. Like, what's his name? He Jiankui, I think his name was, did this famous gene editing, and actually got him thrown in jail, I think, where he edited these Chinese twins to remove a gene or an SNP or something that was associated with HIV immunity, where these girls are basically immune to HIV. As a matter of, actually, I'm pretty sure this HIV immunity SNP is actually pretty common in Europeans. I actually have it myself. I have a genetic variant that reduces my ability to contract HIV by 90%. So, unfortunately, I can't take advantage of that because I'm not an intravenous drug user, nor am I gay. But if I was, I would have that HIV, very high resistance to HIV. And I believe that this guy edited these girls to have that. But the thing is, this is a very risky procedure, and it's very resource intensive. Right? I think what's more likely is once the Chinese government is able to get control over reproduction, like they're able to use artificial wombs instead of relying on men and women getting together, they're just going to do old-fashioned eugenics, where they look at the genes of each of the egg and the sperm, and they match together the highest quality egg and sperm. I think that's what it's going to be. Oh, yeah. If you can get into a labor union, that would be nice. Unfortunately, labor unions, or unions in general, their business model is all about being selective, right? And avoiding getting swamped with people. Like they attempt to control the supply of labor, right? Like that's the whole purpose. But if you can get in, if you can manage to get in, then it's pretty good. And it'll be one of the last things that falls apart. All right, what's this? Mercer is genetically fit to be promiscuous. Undercover Uber Chad. I really don't think so. I think if anything, I'm kind of like more wired to be a monogamous type of guy. I never really had the inclination to, like, if I was a Chad, I would probably be one of those types that like marries a Giga Stacy when he's like 22 or something. Maybe I'm coping, but I suspect that that's what I would end up doing. I wouldn't really be the type that seeks variety out. It's never really been my personality type. Not really the adventurous type. Do you have any white pills on America? Well, I I was thinking of it, and I've used this graphic here. I'm going to pull it up now. Just give me a second. Let's see here. Here we are. Okay, I've used this before. Reflecting social identity processes, anti-Semitic beliefs became increasingly important as a means of self-identification among Germans. Professing anti-Semitism became a sign of cultural identity, of one's belonging to a specific cultural camp. It was a way of communicating an acceptance of a particular set of ideas and a preference for specific social, political, and moral norms. Contemporaries living and acting in Imperial Germany learned to decode the message. It became part of their language, a familiar and convenient symbol. So this is talking about the German Empire before and during the onset of World War II. But this applies to America as well. I actually could see like anti-Jewish opposition due to their dominant influence in the U.S. government as like the ruling class, basically. Or the leaders, not necessarily the only ruling class, but they're defining the friend and enemy distinction for the American ruling class. Even though they're only like 20% of the billionaires, which is still a massive overrepresentation, but they're like 20% of the billionaires in America, I believe. They're still the ones that set the political tone for America. And I could see Americans uniting as a people in opposition to this group. Now, I don't know how stable that would be, but it could give America a sense of identity that it currently lacks right now. And that, I think, would be a white pill, in my opinion. Other than that, I mean, here's the thing about America. Daweed, hang on. Daweed, what's your career advice for the dying out European countries? Blue collar on the rise. That's a good question. You guys will always be an option for outsourcing. So it's not like Poland, for example, gets a lot of outsourced. Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia, all these sort of Central European, post-communist countries. You get targeted because you're cheaper than American developers and even other Western country developers, but you have education that is on par in terms of quality. So I would actually say that as far as like the tech industry goes, you guys are still a little better off than your Western contemporaries. I think it's still viable, at least until the AI bubble pops. If I was like a 20-year-old in Poland and I had the marks for it, I would probably look into some kind of like tech or engineering position that could be done remotely, that I could get American business from. That because the idea would be you work for an outsourcing American company, and then once you reach a certain level of seniority, you then have the ability to migrate into America on an H-1B that you can then replace an American in a job that they should have had. That's what they do with Indians, but it's actually, I would say it's more common for the more lucrative positions per capita with Europeans. It's just that because Indians are such a huge population, they're the most noticeable among this. So yeah. And I also think another white pill, I think, for Europe is as the conditions deteriorate due to non-economic factors in Western Europe, economic factors as well, but mostly demographic factors, there will be this deterioration in the living standards in these countries, unrelated to the economy, because you're dealing with like harassment if you're a woman, or you're dealing with trash everywhere. Like if you look at Paris, it's literally like garbage everywhere. It's like a third world dump. People don't want to live like that. And it's like, I know guys that are in Hungary and that are in Poland, and they'll do like walkthroughs of their small town or city or whatever. And it's like the streets are all clean. People are just on the transit. They're just reading newspapers or something, or reading books. You don't have like homeless people screaming in the subways. Like you don't smell urine everywhere in like public places. These are things that are not materially counted, but they're very valuable. And I think you're going to see a migration over time of Europeans from the West into the East. And actually, as a matter of fact, I know that in Hungary, for example, there's already migration of Germans into Hungary. And they're going to help keep the population supported, and they're generally going to be sympathetic to the right-wing parties in Hungary that want to restrict the non-Europeans. Now, it depends on your perspective. You could see that as like, well, you don't want to be overrun by Germans either, right? But compared to like dying off, I would still say, or being overrun with third worlders, I would still say that it's a little bit of a better option, you know? I don't think European countries are going to be able to maintain their, like the smaller ones, I mean, are going to be able to maintain their distinctiveness that well in the coming decades, because communication now is so easy, like the way that we're talking right now. I'm talking to like, I know that we have a Hungarian, we have a Pole, we have a Romanian, we have Americans, we have all these other different ethnicities, and you're communicating with me in English. You're not communicating in your own language. Like once English becomes the lingua franca, or German, for example, is also very popular, it starts to eventually push out and displace these local languages as you become more exposed to the rest of the world, especially Europe, the rest of Europe, and there's more transit in and out of the country. And I think over time, you're just going to see kind of what happened to the UK, like with Scottish and Irish. Like Irish they used to have their own language. Like Gaelic Irish Gaelic is a language that technically still exists, but it's pretty much gone extinct. Same with the Scottish Gaelic. The people are still there. Like it's not like their DNA has changed. They're still distinct people, but they've lost their exclusive linguistic identity. I think that's going to happen in Europe over time. It would be nice if we could figure out how to freeze that in place so it doesn't happen, but I don't know. I mean, it depends on your perspective, right? I think it would be rather sad to lose European languages, but you're already seeing Finns complaining about this. Like you're seeing conversations in Finnish media about how all the young Finnish kids are actually speaking English now instead of Finnish. And they're speaking, more importantly, they're speaking English to each other rather than Finnish. You know? And what do you think about the deluge of labor and blue collar? No white collar to pay for it. Labor market is going to look apocalyptic in America in the next few years, give or take. 100%. This is something that people don't understand about how the economy is structured. It's like, yes, okay. People will look at like engineer versus electrician versus Walmart cashier, and they'll be like, okay, engineer makes way more. Electrician makes middle income. Walmart cashier makes the least. But it's like you realize that these people are organized in a pyramid. So engineers do make the most, but they're also the smallest pool. So they're most easily disrupted by supply and demand. It doesn't take that many engineers to flood a market to seriously increase unemployment among engineers. And furthermore, you have to ask yourself how many jobs would, like, let's say you have a factory, okay? So that factory might employ 200 factory workers. Well, how many process engineers are going to be employed by this factory? Maybe 2 or 3, maybe. And then how many technicians who are maintenance people are going to be employed at this place? Maybe 10 at most. And it's like you realize that these are like order of magnitude differences. You need to have this underlying population of people that sustain the more specialized careers. And if you don't have that, you're not gonna have those careers available because there's no economy underneath it to support them. And it's interesting because you see this in a lot of Middle Eastern countries. The big problem with a lot of Middle Eastern countries is they have like an educated class of people, but they don't have anyone underneath it. They have like basically like subsistence farmers, and then they have like qualified engineers and nothing in between. And like the subsistence farmers are just subsistence farmers. Qualified engineers, there's no work for them. So they just sort of sit at home living with their parents. And you're seeing this increasingly, I think, in Europe as well. And this is a big problem in Canada right now. Canada is a huge problem. We have a huge underclass of underemployed people. Like, we're one of the most educated countries on earth in terms of our average level of post-secondary education. But we don't have the jobs to support them. And it's largely because we have, like, wages are so low and unemployment is so high that there's no economy to support anything more specialized than, like, wagey shit work, And this is one of the things that's so frustrating, is that this is so easy to solve. You solve this by cutting off the supply of inflow of workers. You cut the inflow of workers, and the craziest part is you don't even have to deport anyone. All you have to do is cut the supply of workers so that there's no more flowing in, and eventually the economy will grow to saturate the current supply of workers, and then you have full employment. This is how, in the baby boomer period, this is how their economies functioned. Not because they didn't want to import people. Like baby boomers have always had this John Lennon, imagine a world with no borders bullshit. Like they all believe that. But they didn't have the technology to mass import people. And the infrastructure in the third world wasn't there. Like, they just didn't have it. But now they do, and we're experiencing this. And the business class they do not want to have that cut off. And by business class, I'm also including not just like the multi-billionaire hedge fund people and like corporate heads. I'm also talking about the quote unquote like mom and pop small business places. Oftentimes the small business places are worse than the big box companies when it comes to abusing employees that are economically precarious, like low wages, or treating them as disposable. Like, they're often worse than the big box companies. Yeah. Order in a high trust society are a basic requirement for maximum productivity. If I know people will rob and eat my crops, then how would I start to grow crops? 100% right. That is true. I would also say that this is a reciprocal relationship too, because in order to have a high trust, low corruption society, you need to have labor sufficiently scarce that there are wages are high enough that it disincentivizes corruption. Like, the main reason why corruption, other than, okay, there are some cases where it's just the people are immoral. Like, I'm talking like the culture is immoral. But there are also many cases where it's just simply because the wages are too low that there's very little to lose from being corrupt. Because you're barely making any money anyways. And so corruption is like one of the means of survival. Like, what you realize is that when survival is at stake, your ethics are one of the first things that goes out the window. It's just a fact of reality. And it's one of the hardest things to get back. Once you lose that as a culture, like on a societal level, once the desperation has been reached where ethics go out the window and people will it's every man for himself, and people lose that sense of like, I shouldn't steal even if I have the opportunity, because even if I could get away with it because it's wrong. Once people lose that and they think, well, if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And I'm barely surviving, so I'm gonna look out for myself. That's it. That's all I care about. Once you reach that point, it's very hard to get back. And this is why I kind of dislike the way that high trust and low trust societies are described, because I feel like they make it like a racial thing. And in some cases, okay, I'm not saying there's nothing to that, but it's like, well, if you look at China versus Japan, or if you look at Russia and Ukraine versus Sweden and Netherlands, and I'm talking about like the indigenous population. I'm not talking the immigrants, but the indigenous people. They're like genetically very close to each other, these populations, but their behavior is completely different. You have to explain that. It can't just be down to DNA. And I think it's because of these other elements that I was describing. Yeah, they're capitalists. I mean, I'm trying to, maybe it's because I have this sort of instinctive aversion to using the C word because it's always associated with Marxists. Talking about the capitalist class, but it is really them. Yeah. But it's also like, I don't know if you could consider the small business owners to be really capitalists. They're more like the bougie bourgeois types. They don't really have enough money that they can invest and do returns on investment, but they have enough money that they can like run their little vanity shops that only survive due to the cheap labor environment that's artificially created. That wouldn't exist if we didn't have this infinite inflow through government-mandated immigration, this inflow of workers. If we didn't have that, which we wouldn't have if our government didn't facilitate it, it'd be a completely different environment. And what are you guys talking about here? Internet plays a huge role in this. Even countries with language isolates like Japan or Korea, Gen Z doesn't really use dialects anymore. Yeah, that's another thing I noticed. My mother is from the Ottawa Valley, and the Ottawa Valley has a distinct accent that almost sounds like if you've ever heard of Northern Irish accents, if you guys ever heard the sort of stereotypical top of the morning taya, that kind of accent, they kind of sound a little bit like that, and but you only hear that with older people now. You don't hear it with young people. Young people all sound the same. They all sound like me. And I'm sure I have a little bit of an accent, but it's probably not very distinct compared to like even my mother's generation. Yeah, petit bourgeois. Yeah, it's what we would say. We need to seize the means of reproduction. And older folk tales speak of us coming from Sumerian nobility, branching off to Eastern Asia later. Hungarian lore is fascinating. We have the most complex language on the planet. Oh man, that sounds a little bit like I'm into archaeogenetics as a hobby. Turks are some of the most insane people on the planet when it comes to LARPing, genetics LARPing. It's nothing to do with Hungarians, obviously, because Hungarians different. Obviously, Uralic is not the same as Turkic, but just made me think of like they come up with all of these crazy theories about Turks actually being the secret founders of China, and they also were the secret Aryans, and they were it's completely crazy. Do you think taking Venezuela's oil will help? No, it will not. Venezuelan oil is a very heavy crude. It's similar in terms of the cost as the Canadian oil. And Canadian oil is basically it's asphalt. We call it the oil sands up here. And that's because you don't even pump it. You basically like mine it with a pickaxe. It's literally like gigantic chunks of asphalt that you mine out of the ground. And it's very expensive to refine. In Canada, and you have to remember, we have state-of-the-art refining capability, right? Like, as much as I shit on Canada, as far as infrastructure goes for oil and gas extraction and refining, we are light years ahead of Venezuela. Venezuela has nothing like the kind of extractive capacity we do. And for us, it's only profitable to pull oil out of the ground when oil is like $65 a barrel or more. If it's less than that, it actually becomes uneconomical to even extract oil from the oil sands. And Venezuela, even if they had the same infrastructure as us, that would likely be the price cutoff for them, would be around $65 a barrel. So even though I'm sure it wouldn't hurt to have that oil in the market, it wouldn't, for the amount that they can extract due to their infrastructure being really shitty and backwards, and there's a lot of corruption. You add to that how low quality their oil is, it's very unlikely that that they would have a significant enough impact to offset the Gulf reserves. You can create new communities, traditions. This provides us a vacuum to be creative. Now, this is something I've realized is in order to, like, what exactly is a culture? A culture is not this sort of, like, we tend to mysticize culture where we make it into this, like this thing that just sort of comes out of the ether when we're together in an ethnically homogenous community. But really, what it is, if you want to think of it practically, it's where people live together in the same communities for multiple generations. And then over time, they develop these shared practices and behaviors and activities that they do together. And it could even be something as simple as like playing soccer in the community or whatever. It requires people to be living in a fixed location for multiple generations without a massive influx of people in and out of this culture. It requires isolation, and it requires continuity from generation to generation. And that's what creates culture. You cannot have culture without that. You can't just sort of, like, people have this impression that you can create culture by like creating like art and other memes and whatever. And it's not really true. Like, you need to have, like, isolation and segregation is the basis of culture. If you want to create a distinct culture that's shared within your community. And yeah, it is true that the differences, well, Darzak, what you're describing is the differences in culture between, for example, like what you would see in Africa or the Middle East or East Asia or Europe. That's true. That there are certain behaviors that will replicate themselves in those communities that they'll be the same. It's like actually, you know what this reminds me of? On Twitter, there's if you look at African Twitter from like Africa, like Nigeria, and you look at how they interact with each other, it's almost Black Americans actually get baited all the time by African Twitter because the problems that Black men and Black women have with each other are almost identical in terms of like just the day-to-day behavioral problems they have with each other. And so it's almost hard to tell whether this like Black woman talking about like this broke-ass N-word ain't got nothing. Like when you see a post like that, it's like you click it and then you see it's a Nigerian woman who's named like Ukupono Ongalawa or whatever, instead of like Charmaine Laquandra or whatever. So you can see these sort of behavioral elements that get shared across several generations of separation. That's true, but on the other hand, you still can't get a distinct culture without separating it from the outside world in some way. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do like the Amish thing where you like form a completely segregated community that's insular and like shuns people if they are too contaminated with the outside world. Like, you don't have to do that, but you need people to be fixed in a location from generation to generation. And this is why, by the way, people like Ben Shapiro, like if you guys remember that Ben Shapiro quote where he's like, oh, well, if you can't afford to live in this area, well, you shouldn't live in this area. You should move somewhere else. Even if your parents grew up here, you don't have a right to live there. It's like, no, actually they do. Like this is how you form a community, is by having these people live in the same area. And the way, like one of the changes I would make if I was in charge of policy, I would require it where in order to move into a given community, we prioritize the children of people born into this community. First of all, they get first grabs on any property that comes up for sale in the community. And in order to get into a given community, you have to be approved of by the entire community. You can't just buy a house. People can't just put their houses up for sale and then an outsider buys it and moves in. I would make all of these checks and balances and conditions to try and maintain continuity within communities as much as possible. Because that's like the basis of a culture. That's the basis of your identity. That's how you form a people. Otherwise you're just these sort of uprooted, like identityless consumers. And it's like, this is something I noticed with my sisters, and it's not to shit on my sisters. My sisters are actually pretty nice people, but even for women. But they're all significantly older than me, so they're basically middle aged, and their kids are teenagers, and they live in these neighborhoods, these suburban neighborhoods with pools, and the only thing they have in common with their neighbors is that they make roughly the same income. And like they have nothing else in common. And like their kids will go to the same school, and they'll play on the same sports teams, or they'll play on the same hockey team or something. Like that's the only thing they have in common. And or what they watched on TV. Those are the only things that they have in common with their neighbors. There's no continuity there. Like all of them are first generation members of this suburb that they live in. And that's just so corrosive to identity. It just eventually just destroys all identity. No. Hello from Albania. Hey, how you doing? We used to use Albania as a euphemism for somewhere else. So if you ever hear previous streams where we're talking about Albanians, it's not your kind of Albanians. It's different kind of Albanians. It's circumcised Albanians, we'll put it that way. The Amish are the only working model we have. Worship of technology is one of the main reasons we have no communities. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm not a Luddite, but as a matter of fact, like if we didn't have the economic system that we have, like these technology leaps, like AI, for example, imagine if we were able to, and this is something I discussed, I think, in previous streams, or at least, or maybe on other people's podcasts and streams. But imagine a situation where we could, like, let's say that you have a fully automated factory. Like, everything is automated. There's no workers required. And it produces whatever, like, a wide variety of goods depending on the input. And imagine that if you had a state that was, or a government that was not, like, a gay democracy or whatever, and that the government owned this factory and then was able to lease the factory to businesses for the businesses to produce whatever they want. And then in exchange, the rent that you get from that then can either go to government revenue, or it can even be dispersed to the population as like a universal basic income. Like imagine stuff like that. And then you could, or what you could do is imagine that you have, due to AI, you have this like highly automated, highly productive economy, and you're able to get all this money from very little work that's being put in, and you can just use this money to incentivize behavior. Like for example, let's say that you're the US and you have like 10 cities that are completely economically dominating, and then you have the rest of the country is like a wasteland. Like the flyover states are just a wasteland of no opportunity. It's like, well, if you have all this free revenue coming in from this automated production, you could be like, we're going to give you free money to settle this area and settle this state, and create a community in this state, and we will inject money into this region specifically, and we will like create a regional economy artificially in order for you to populate the state and like spread the population out, to decentralize, distribute the economy so that it's not concentrated into these cities. Like you could do stuff like that. That would be amazing. But because of the way things are, it just results in like productivity. It's really an insane situation where productivity becomes an enemy, because it means that there's less, again, it's like the economic efficiency issue, where there's fewer ways for the middleman to make money, because it's becoming a more efficient transaction between the two parties. There's no intermediates anymore, you know? It's like going from the grain straight to the plate without somebody in the middle doing the reaping and doing the processing, because it's all automated, you know? And that just means that the person in the middle is thrown out of work and starves to death. Like it's really a horrific situation in that regard. And the common rabble should not have access to most technology. It's a bit of a brotherhood of steel position to have. Probably it's right. Small communities that don't need money to function. Yeah, but how would that work in the modern society? I suppose if you had like a techno-primitivist society, maybe you could, because if you had like forced primitivism, like what you have with the Amish, I suppose you would then have these economic niches that are available again, right? Kind of like how the Amish are, like my mother lived near a Mennonite colony. The Mennonites are very similar to the Amish in a lot of ways. Like they have the same sort of technophobia. And they would have like these stores that they would own where they would have these handcrafted furnitures that you could buy. And the handcrafted furniture would be a lot more expensive than something that you could get at IKEA, but it would be there in like 100 years, right? Like my mother still has wooden cabinets that her great-grandfather passed down to her that were made in the 19th century or 18th century. Like that's how well crafted some of these artisan pieces were. And those economic niches still exist because they just flat out reject manufacturing, like at scale. So I suppose if you have communities like that, then you could do that. But then it like the only reason why they're able to do that is because it's like a religious commitment, or they view because of their Anabaptism, they view the material advances of automation as like something that causes immorality, right? You'd need to have something similar in order to produce that kind of society, you know? UBI gives men even less leverage in relationships than they already have. I'm not so sure about that, to be honest with you. Because, like, how much leverage do men have economically anyways? I would say very little. Like, I'm not sure where you are, but up here in Canada, it's, like, when I think of my sisters again, 2 out of 3 of them are the breadwinners in their families. Like, my 2 oldest sisters make more than their husbands. That's very common now. Now, in some ways, this is like artificially created, but I'm not so sure if it's, because not because necessarily that it would not cause a problem, but it's like the problem already exists. Largely due to like DEI policies, right? Though, like another thing you could do, and I've mentioned this multiple times in the past, is you could have a system in place where you literally like pay women a full-time salary to just birth out kids. Make it so that they have to be married to receive it, so that you don't have like dysgenic fertility. But if you just like paid women a full-time salary to pop out kids, that would be a really easy way to increase the birth rate. I think it would have a major effect. Like there are ways that you could socially, if we had access to this automation and AI based productive advantages, there are all these tools that we could have to change things for the better, It just takes having control of the society, control of the state, really. You made a meme about me. Oh, lovely. Well, I will probably take a look at that, but actually it's almost 3 hours in. So I think I'm going to end the stream now, guys. It's been a great stream. I managed to monologue a lot more than I thought I could. I was a little worried I would run short, but it looks like it's been pretty good in terms of timing. So thanks for showing up, guys. It's been a great stream. I'll talk to you all later.